Bachmann have once again captured the look of the prototype pretty much perfectly. Hi there, it's so great to see you. I hope I find you well. I'm Jenny Kirk, welcoming you up here to Weir Yard. Now today we're going to be delving into the world of 009. It's an area that we've talked about a fair amount before, and we've reviewed a number of models, and not least we've had that multi-part series to build Myneth Tatus, which was a minimum space continuous running 009 layout. Now 009 really does lend itself to minimum space modelling. It's such a great scale and gauge. But the subject of today's video is the mainline Hunslets that have come through from Bachmann actually very quickly. They weren't announced that long ago, and these are not to be confused with the super diminutive Quarry Hunslets, which have also started appearing. But no, this is a completely different model, and in real life there were 3 of these that were built to run the mainline traffic on the Penrhyn Quarry Railway, taking the trains of dressed slates from the quarry all the way down to the port at Penrhyn, and most likely carrying other supplies like coal all the way back up as well. The railway needed 3 of these, and sometimes actually they would even be double-headed. So there was Charles, Linda and Blanche. When operations on the railway finished, thankfully, all 3 did manage to survive. Linda and Blanche found their way to the Festiniog Railway that, as a fledgling preservation concern, was desperately short of working motive power. So the 2 locomotives that were still in fully working order seemed like a brilliant idea, and Linda and Blanche were first off hired and then outright bought. But they weren't quite 100% suitable in their native form for the Festiniog, not least because there was a slight difference in gauge, and in fact it was something that provided inspiration for some of the Reverend Awdry's books too. So that Linda's Leap, as it got referred to, was a derailment of Linda when double-heading with another locomotive, and was only saved from quite a nasty roll down the hillside by the fact that the coupling between the 2 locomotives held them tight. And if you recognise that, well, then that is definitely a story that made it into the Thomas the Tank Engine books. Now, Charles didn't get bought, and that was mostly because the boiler was absolutely worn out and would have needed replacing, and the Festiniog simply couldn't afford to spend that kind of money to rebuild a locomotive before pressing it into service. Although thankfully Charles did survive, and you can still see her in a museum where she is in original condition, unlike Linda and Blanche that have both been rebuilt into a 240 wheel arrangement and have a tender that makes them much more suited to the Festiniog railway operation. But without further ado, and in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts, with their full range available to browse and buy today from their UK stockists tramfabrique.co.uk, and additional support coming from Rails of Sheffield. Sell to the name you know and trust. Buy, sell or exchange any age or any gauge. Call them now for the very best price. Check them out today at the link below. But I'm really excited about the mainline Hunslets that have come through from Bachmann, so much so that I couldn't resist buying Blanche. So today we're going to be taking a good close look and see if they really do live up to expectations. The Bachmann double fairly wowed the modelling world when it was announced, and it had a double whammy up its sleeve because it actually appeared in the shops within a couple of weeks of that announcement being made. And I actually quite like it when models are announced this way. I honestly don't really care much for having to wait for several years for a model to come through, so it's quite exciting that a model gets announced and then is just there for you to buy when the buzz is still fresh. And that again is exactly what Bachmann have done with the Penrhyn Mainline Hunslets. They made the announcement, and then Blanche at least has reached the shops, and I couldn't resist, and this was one of my Worley pickups. I just really had to have one. Now, there are two other models which are still forthcoming. That's Charles and Linda in the Penrhyn Railway versions, and we've got some variety on the different liveries. But Blanche certainly looked so special, I had to pick her up. Now, we've got a catalogue number of 391-125, and this is the Mainline Hunslet 040 saddle tank as Blanche in the Penrhyn Quarry Railway lined black early. So this, I believe, is suitable for Era 2. So this is pre-grouping, but grouping doesn't really count when it comes to Penrhyn Quarry because I think they just carried on as before. And this features a Next 18 DCC decoder socket, and there is actually a speaker that comes factory fitted hidden away somewhere in this locomotive. So I'm actually going to fit her with a Dula and Haas sound decoder, and this is supplied via tramfabric.co.uk, who are also the UK stockists for the Trainomatic line of decoders, and you'll find their details down below. So if you really like the sound installation, then certainly the Dula and Haas sound decoders are available for what is actually a very, very favourable price compared with other brands. The box is the standard Bachmann form factor that they actually use in 00 for wagons, and it's really strange to get locomotives in this size. But we get the green and red instead of the blue and red, which does mean that they are really, really easy to tell apart. Now, I'm just going to pull this out, and you can immediately see we've got some additional parts, including some alternative couplings, and these for if you want to double head the locomotives. These are just a standard 009 coupling, but as it comes, the locomotives tend not to have the loop. But the Penrhyn Quarry Mainline Hunslets did have a habit of double heading, so they provide you with that to be able to also replicate that. Now, we've got some paperwork here with it, and it shows you what to do with that coupling. But you see there, we've got a tender. Now, Linda and Blanche were bought by the Festiniog Railway back in the early days. But this shows the tender that the locomotives received, and later on in here we also get reference to the front bogie truck that they Linda and Blanche also received. So from this we can deduce that we've got a forthcoming later version of the model as well, which I don't think has been officially announced, but these instructions do clarify that. We've also got the firebox glow and flicker, and a little bit of information on these if you use the Bachmann Next 18 decoder, just how to set up the flicker. Turning this over, we've got etched nameplates for Blanche. Just turn that round so you can see there, those are beautiful. And works plates as well, again etched. And these are for the user to fit if you decide to, and the locomotive does come with printed versions of both of those. So if, like me, you're not too fussed, you can leave them be and just have the locomotive as is. But you can see that this is a tiny locomotive, and with her outside frames, she really is quite an interesting design. Now, we've got quite high front cylinders with this angled connecting rod going to the rear wheels, and the angle is such that actually it is able to be inside the connecting rods rather than outside, and that's an unusual feature that Hunslet were able to pull off simply because of just how high these cylinders were. So this doesn't interfere with the throw of the crank. There is a lot of weight in this model for its size. That is quite heavy. And just to give you an idea on size, I'm just going to reach over here and this is the Bachmann J72. So just to give you a comparison between the two, that is definitely a lot smaller than what is actually already a fairly small locomotive. Bachmann have once again captured the look of the prototype pretty much perfectly as far as I can tell. And certainly the finish on this model is superb. We've got that early Penrhyn Quarry Railway livery, and actually it looks an awful lot like the BR lined black livery. I do wonder whether this was a fairly common livery back in the day across various industrial concerns and locomotive owning companies, such that actually, when it came to come up with a BR livery, what they were actually doing was taking cues from liveries that already existed, such as this. As such, this locomotive really does look like it would fit quite in with BR liveried locos. I do like that kind of creamy blue, almost grey with the red. It's a great colour combination with the slightly glossy black of the rest of the locomotive. We've got a lot of additional detail down the side here with look to be possibly injectors, water feeds, and then we've also got the gear as well coming back to the cab, where there's the forward and reverse lever in there that would connect to this, which would then in turn affect the valve settings. Talking of the valves, we've also got the representation of the internal motion there. That doesn't go round, but certainly it's very visible on the prototype, and Bachmann have replicated that through the access cutout there. Again, everything is beautifully lined, and you can just see there just how sharp those red lines are and how straight and true everything is. You can imagine if you built a kit or something, replicating lining this good would be near enough impossible. The back of the cab is very ornately done. We've got these little sort of cupboard doors at the bottom. They don't open, they are moulded in there, but certainly it's a nice touch, and this would have been to give access, I guess, to the coupling without having to get out of the cab, and just made things a little bit easier. The cab itself is surprisingly open for a locomotive this small. It's quite a roomy cab, and we've got all of that backhead detail, the regulator on there, a lot of separately applied details. We've got the safety valve bonnet with the polished brass finish, and actually Bachmann are getting very good at this polished brass look. I think it's painted plastic, but certainly it does really look like metal. I think we first saw this on the C-Class number 592 in the South Eastern and Chatham Railway livery, but since then they've come on even better and better. Looking to the works plate, now that is printed detail, but you can see just how sharp and crisp that is, and whilst there are those etched ones to add, you won't be disappointed leaving them as is. If you do want to fit the etched plates, then I recommend a very tiny amount of a glue such as PVA. You do not want to use super glue, seriously. It's just a complete minefield, and you're more likely to ruin the lovely finish on the model. The Blanche nameplate as well is pretty sharp and crisp, and again, I personally see no need to replace that for an etch plate, but they are included for your convenience. Looking to the rest of the model, the couplings are in the standard plug-in 009 or same as N-gauge actually couplings there, so you could actually fit this with a whole host of different coupling options, and in all honesty my personal preference is the West Hill Wagon Works N-gauge magnetic couplings, which I've used on all of the rest of my 009 stock, and I've found them to be an absolutely excellent choice to replace these factory couplings. The front look of the cab front, again, they've captured those very large spectacle windows there perfectly. The glazing does look slightly thick, and looking into the back, you can see we've got a little bit of a protrusion with the glazing. I think a couple of very, very small milk bottles might be missing their bottoms, but actually it's not too bad, and I'm very, very glad to see that they've not gone for a bar of glazing all the way across, which certainly would have detracted quite badly. The inside of the cab has this wonderful cream colour, which really does set off the rest of the black. And we've got a red sort of below waist height at the back and around the sides, just visible in there. It's such a lovely colour scheme. You can see that she would have been a very, very smart locomotive working on the Penrhyn Quarry Railway. Now, the Mainline Hunslets were very different from the Quarry Hunslets, a very, very different task that they were employed for. They were actually used on, as the name suggests, the main line from the quarry down to the port of Penrhyn to take the full trains up and down those gradients. And they would sometimes work double-headed, but certainly they were a very capable machine designed to pull these heavier loads that the Quarry Hunslet really couldn't. Now, the Quarry Hunslet is forthcoming from Bachmann. We have already received a Britomart to the shops, but that really is a tiny beast. But I am going to be good, and I'm hanging on because Dorothea is the locomotive that I really do like the look of, and that is due sometime in the new year. In terms of DCC fitting, it couldn't be simpler. Now, I'm going to be fitting this with a Dula and Haas Next 18 sound decoder, and I've got this through Tramfabrique, who are the UK stockists for Dula and Haas, and also for Train-O-Matic. And one of the options that you can specify at the time of buying is to have one of their sound files loaded onto the decoder, and it's a really, really competitive price if you go down this route. The sound file is actually for a Terrier, but I'm one of those people that, you know what, I'm quite happy with something that sounds roughly like a steam locomotive. I know that there are purists out there who are probably spinning in their little rivet counter detector van, but certainly I'm quite happy with this sounding a little bit like a Terrier. To get inside this locomotive, it really is quite easy. Turning her over, we've got two screws towards the back, one either side of the cab. We've then got another two screws back here, and it's the ones that are in the very deep recessed holes that we're after. I'm just going to undo these now, and a small crosshead jeweler's screwdriver should be more than adequate to do this. Now, they are quite small screws, so just be very careful and don't let it chew the head. They are not overly torqued in hard, but certainly you don't want to scrub those heads and make it so you cannot get the screw in or out. The screws are quite small, so just make sure that you keep them safe. The next screw that we're looking for is that one just there at the tip of the screwdriver. Again, that's the only one that we need to undo. Leave any other screws that you see where they are, as they will be for holding in detail. Once we've done that, it really is quite simple. Wiggle the body free, and you may find that a pair of tweezers is helpful just to pull out these two pipes. You don't necessarily have to pull them out all the way, but just give them a help and they'll pull free, and the whole body will come away from the chassis, and we can actually see some of that fabulous detail in the cab, all the better now, including those sight gauges. really is exquisite. There is a great deal of what appears to be metal in there as well to give some extra adhesion to the model. And we can also see the firebox hole there, which is open. And this is part of the firebox glow effect that this model incorporates. There are two different LEDs, and these use two of the auxiliary functions, which you can set up with a flicker effect. I've already test fitted this locomotive with the Doola and Haas Next 18 decoder, and this fits absolutely perfectly within the space of this locomotive, despite the fact that it's a little bit on the larger side, given that it is a sound decoder over a regular decoder. When you first open up the locomotive, you'll see a blanking plate in place here. Taking the blanking plate out is exactly the same as putting in and taking out a Next 18 decoder. With the decoder or blanking plate removed, you can see the socket just here. It really is quite easy to fit a Next 18 decoder. Line the male and the female up, and then just gently push it into place. There you can see that the pins have gone in all the way. Don't force it, and the decoder sits parallel with the circuit board underneath. With the body off, we can also see some of that extra detail that's hidden away in the chassis, including the springs, some of the clacks, and the underside of the boiler, which hides the motor and also appears to include a reasonable amount of additional metal for adhesion purposes. The speaker is hidden away underneath there, and because that's pre-fitted, you do not need to buy an additional speaker for this locomotive. Putting the locomotive back together is quite simply a reverse of the process that we just carried out. With a pair of tweezers, you may need to just line up these pipes into the top of the cylinders. Once they're lined up, the entire body will just slide carefully down back into place, and you'll see that the bottom part there will go all the way down to the running plate, and again the cab will go all the way down. There's just a couple of clips there where the back nestles into place. Give it a push and it clicks in. We can then refit all of the screws underneath. Don't over torque them, otherwise you run the risk of stripping the thread or stripping the head. Just screw them in until you can just feel resistance and no more. And it's as easy as that. With its diminutive size, the locomotive certainly packs a punch well above its weight. I found running this locomotive it performed exceptionally well, despite its four-wheel pickup, and running on Monmouth I experienced no real problems whatsoever. After a period of running in, it really did manage to run down to a crawl quite well, and the firebox glow is particularly pleasing, giving a glow within the cab that can be seen, and this is a really good effect and a nice use of the DCC functions. Away from the 009 layout, the model can also have a second job as a load on a wagon, and I actually find the 22-ton double bolster wagons particularly good to load up this model and use it as a freight load in between its uses on Monmouth. This is sort of prototypically correct, as there do exist photographs of at least one of these mainline Hunslets on a flat wagon on its journey to the Festiniog Railway. So we come now to the scores. First up is build quality, and actually I'm really impressed with how well this model goes together. There's no sense of any of the parts being fragile. None of the detail feels like it's at risk of being damaged with handling. And even this pipework, the whistle, the tip of the dome, all of this does feel pretty robust. The only area that I could really feel that criticism could genuinely be justified at being levelled are these overly thick spectacle glasses on the cab. On the front, at certain angles, you do get a sense that there's quite a thickness on there, but it's not actually too bad. Where I noticed it is on the back of the cab, and you can see on the inside that glazing does protrude a little bit too much, but I can understand that compromises do have to be made, and at least they are nice and flush on the outside, and that lining really sets them off. So I'm going to give this a 9.7 out of 10. On running quality, the locomotive performed pretty well. Bachmann have managed to get a reasonable amount of ballast weight into this, and despite its short wheelbase 040 chassis, it did seem to run reasonably well. There's a slight hunting motion as it goes along, and whilst the performance did improve the more I ran it, it didn't quite feel like it would reliably manage a super slow crawl, but overall it's a pretty great performance, and I'm going to give it a 9.3 out of 10. On DCC fitting and innovation, I really do like that firebox glow. It's pretty effective, and it's something that has been a little bit of a movable feast with firebox glows from numerous other locomotives that have been on the market, that sometimes they're just far too dim, or they're just overpowering, or there's something not quite right. With this locomotive, it sets a lovely glow within the cab, which actually I thought worked really, really well. And if you're prepared to play around with the CV settings, then you can set up a really effective flicker, and with the two different auxiliary functions to play with, you can experiment with different conditions depending on whether you're having the locomotive work hard, coasting, sat in a siding, and it's just another layer that you can gain enjoyment from using this model with. The DCC fitting is reasonably straightforward, although I did find that the different sized screws used on the bottom meant that you had to be just a little bit careful to remember which screw came from where. And 5 screws did feel just slightly excessive in order to hold everything together. But we're probably splitting hairs, and I'm going to give this a 9.9. On accuracy and quality of finish, well, that lining really is truly superb. The finish on this model really just cannot be faulted. And even though the nameplate and the works plate are crisp and clear, and some of the best examples of printing that I've seen on a model, they go one step further and give you etched plates, just in case you want to go down that route. I'm not actually going to apply them because I think that these are superb, but the fact that they're there to give you that choice really is a great move, and I'm going to give this a 10 out of 10. Next up is value for money, and the DCC Ready version of this model is available for just over £161 from retailers that we could see, and we've got an affiliate link down below to take you to Rails of Sheffield to find your own version either of Blanche or of the other versions that are going to be forthcoming in the new year. You can also get them with factory sound fitted options at around £240, and again they can be found at the link below. It's quite an expensive model when you consider just how tiny it is, but size is not an indicator of how much a model is going to cost, and this really does feel like Swiss craftsmanship in terms of the motor, the drive, the detail, and everything that's gone into it. The livery application is exquisite, and I do believe that this does offer immense value for money. 009 has never been more modelable, and this is certainly a great addition to the 009 stable of locomotives that are available, and I'm going to give this an 8.9, and that gives us a grand total of 47.8 out of 50, and that is an exceptionally good score for what is an exceptionally good locomotive. Whilst I've shelled out for Blanche, because I just couldn't wait for the other models to come through, I've got a sneaky suspicion that actually there's going to be more that are added to the stable that run on Mynydtatus. It's getting a bit crowded on there. Maybe I'll just have to build a bigger 009 layout. But certainly these models are exquisite, and I can wholeheartedly recommend them. We saw Bachmann sweep the award for 009 Locomotive of the Year with their double fairly, and I honestly believe that we're going to see exactly the same happen at the next set of awards, with this locomotive gaining the 009 Locomotive of the Year award. In fact, I suspect the only other model that could run a chance of knocking it off that top spot is the Quarry Hunslets, again from Bachmann. It's never been a better time to model in 009, and certainly this is a beautiful locomotive. Well, I hope you really enjoyed today's video, and if you do like the look of the locomotive featured, then we've got an affiliate link to Rails of Sheffield, which allows you to find both Blanche and the other two versions that are currently announced, although we've got a clue in the instructions for the locomotive that we are going to have the later rebuilt versions of Linda and Blanche suitable for later Festiniog railway running, and that's certainly something that I'm going to keep an eye on, and I think that Linda might just turn up in the tender form and will become a little bit of a feature on Mynydtatus. But I'd love to hear from you what you think in the comments section down below. Are these something that really tickled your fancy? Do you have one of these, or is there a particular one that you're looking forward to, and what are the reasons maybe for that? Do share your stories here in the comments, and please tickle that like button and share the video to social media as well. It's a great help for the channel, and if you haven't already done so, do please consider subscribing too, to be the first to know about new videos as and when they go up. We've also got a fully packed merch store down below. Do check out the bits and bobs that we've got on offer, and you can also head on over to Patreon to help support the channel or become a channel member too. But until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying you take great care of yourself. Happy modelling. Bye for now. Today's video is sponsored by Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders designed to be fully compatible with every manufacturer's locomotive. Visit train-o-matic.com to browse the full range and see what they've got suitable for you. Additional support comes from Rails of Sheffield. Sell to the name you know and trust. Family-run business purchasing collections for over 50 years. From single items to lifetime collections, no collection is too small or too big. Buy, sell or exchange, any age or any gauge. Rails will take everything: locos, coaches, wagons, track work, controllers, accessories. In fact, they'll take absolutely everything, and certainly will not cherry pick the best items. Rails are only a phone call away. Call them now for the very best price and get instant cash payment or same-day transfer. Check them out today at the link below. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Offshore Allen, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Sparky 107107, George Botterini, Chris Moss, Robert Steers, Sam Yates, Dale Williams, John N from NC, NYMRish, Jonathan Foster, Peter, Clifford Ison, Larry W. Grant, NI Railways 4000 class, Ian Coulson, Alan Dickerson, Eddie Popper, Karen Nichol, Medwin Williams, Crossways Point Junction, 3B Rail, Jennifer Horton, and James Beckett. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.